It was the year 1964 when Kitty Genovese, a bartender, was coming back late at night from work. As she was parking her car in Queens, New York, in the area that she lived in, she was approached by a man. This man had ill intent. He followed her home, and what proceeded to unfold, I will spare you the gruesome details, but she called out for help, and somebody heard, and it was a gentleman who said, "Let that girl alone," and her attacker ran off, only to come back 10 minutes later and finish the job. Kitty's no longer with us, but the lesson of the bystander effect is, because her story was publicized as she called out for help, and nobody did anything except a man from far away saying, "Leave her alone," only to allow her to be vulnerable, spilling time on the sidewalk, injured, suffering, unable to help herself. She needed police intervention. She needed somebody to swoop in and to really, really save her. And what's frightening about this story is that this has been repeated over and over. And what tends to happen is that when people are in a group, this is a known psychological, sociological phenomenon, although it has been critically examined and questioned to some degree, but I'm just leaving it simple for our discussion. When people feel in a group, there's a sort of complacency that sets in, where everybody, if they're not careful, can fall prey to this bystander effect that somebody else is calling the police, somebody else is intervening, somebody else is helping her. And when everybody does that, nobody does. There are multiple instances of the bystander effect in our social fabric of society. And this is why when you take a CPR class, you are specifically trained that in the event of an emergency, you have to tell somebody, call 911. Because what happens is that, and I've personally seen it, people will stand around and gawk or film. And nobody, I don't want to say nobody, but unless you know about this effect, or unless you naturally have a call to action, if you are somebody that is jumping up in the face of emergency because you're activated, then this bystander effect doesn't apply to you. But you are a rarity. Because what happens is people watch. They actually just watch. And like a train in slow motion crashing, they might even heartlessly film it and post it to social media, almost as a form of sports or entertainment, when somebody might actually be fighting for their life, fighting for their existence. And if we take this bystander effect and we apply it to a spiritual awakening in the Ascension process, it raises some interesting questions. How do we, with all of our manifestation potential, how do we manifest for the collective? Or do we at all? Because I see a lot of manifestation content that is focused on the individual. Here's how to manifest wealth, abundance, love, prosperity, all of the things that people desire. Here's how to shift into your highest timeline, where the center of the universe is you, and the product of your manifestation are directly linked to your desires. And very few times, in fact, I can't think of a single piece of content. I'm sure I must have come across something somewhere, but it's not coming to mind. Very little content is dedicated to manifesting for the collective. Even when there are pieces of content of people being frightened for the collective and worried about what is unfolding and what is manifesting. And yet with all of this, creators' abilities at our fingertips, and there are people who are activists and people who are doing things. So I'm not trying to say that nobody's doing anything, because that's just patently false. There are many people that, in their own way, are taking care of things. What I'm talking about is the educational content of how to manifest and giving people advice about manifestation and how to apply the manifestation principles very often only to their own life. That's the segment that I see that we need improvement on in our collective. Because all it takes is us collectively deciding on a different future or a particular outcome. Like many people are manifesting a new earth. Practically speaking, how do we get to that new earth if we don't manifest that the problems are resolved in a satisfactory manner? Because what I have seen in my travels is this recapitulation of taking the past with us, taking the problems with us, or being ignorant of the actual problems and taking them along with us too, because we don't know how things are really working. And so we're like, let's just keep everything intact and port it over to the new earth. Okay, so we are duplicating the earth, and we're saying some of us are ascending, but not all of us. So we're manifesting a rapture. Got it. Some of us are on a 5D timeline and not a 3D timeline because we have, quote, done the work. Got it. And then we get there. Who's going to build roads and systems and schools? And are there going to be ambulances? Will there be organizations that we are familiar with? Is there going to be currency? Who's in charge over there? Do we have the same president? You know, like these are really interesting, unsolved questions when we talk about the new earth, because it's quite fuzzy. People say, oh, we're going to the new earth. What does that mean exactly? Practically speaking, does it mean we pop out into a new version of the planet Earth and it's completely nascent form where there's no architecture, there's no GPS system, there's no smartphones, there's no companies that are collecting our data behind it? And so when we start talking about these manifestation potentials in our collective, where are the conversations about how this is happening? Maybe my particular feeds just don't cover it. And that's entirely possible. It could simply be that I have self-selected myself into a very particular bubble, and I don't even watch a lot of manifestation content. So it could just be that I'm watching the most viral videos and there are conversations, and that's great. I hope to see more of that in the future if that is the case, and feel free to chime in the comments if you have witnessed this. But in lieu of those comments, all I have is my personal experience and my experience talking with others, which is, generally speaking, the way we are utilizing these, quote, powers of ours, these abilities to create reality, is that we're very, very detailed about the income that we want or the partners that we're trying to manifest into our lives. But yet somehow there's a really big blank when it comes to talking about this new earth. Literally, people will write down highly specific things that they want in their life and how they want their problems to be solved. And yet there's this big hand waving, oh, we're just going to go to the new earth. We're just in the 5D now. Somebody else is going to figure it out. Do you think that we are all falling prey to this bystander effect, but at a spiritual level? Because if our present world and reality is crumbling and systems and institutions are needing to be revamped and rebooted, where does this happen? Does this happen in the new earth on the 5D timeline? Does it happen before we get there? I don't have those answers. These are rhetorical questions, but this is what I mean. How is it that we collectively are so precise with our manifestation sometimes when it directly involves us? And when it comes to our future and our legacy, it's somehow just this fantasy concept. We're just going to shift into what? A new earth. What does that mean? I remember being in Costa Rica. It was the year 2020. And there was a notable content creator who was offering a quantum meditation to a lot of people, that we were all going to meditate on shifting ourselves to the new earth, like right then and there. And I remember feeling so frustrated and a little dismayed, because I felt like if we just go there right now, we're going to recreate the same, because that's what we do. We literally create from yesterday. We wake up and we boot all of our memories and all of our problems from yesterday. That's what Joe Dispenza talks about. And when we start quantum traveling and quantum shifting, we break away from that. But for the most part, we are wired to actually carry over literally the same emails, the same devices, the same companies, the same presidents, the same politics. You get the point. So if there are serious systemic issues that need to be addressed and solved, and we all just port to the new earth, quantum style, then the most likely outcome, like 99.999999999%, in my opinion, is that we install the same infrastructure, the same traffic lights, the same neighborhoods, the same backbone to the internet, the same 3-letter agencies, the same police forces, the same schools, the same universities, the same trust funds, the same finances. You get the gist, right? So I don't mean to be relentless, but when people talk about going to the new earth, what does that mean? It means that all of our problems are solved. How? By magic. And when we have the thought patterns that are wired to actually recreate yesterday in today's template, then what happens is that the problems that we don't even know are problems yet are taken with us. And some of the most stubborn problems are the most hidden, bifurcated, compartmentalized problems. So you only ever get a little tiny peek at one sliver of a facet of a much bigger whole. And so what ends up happening is that we're all looking at the obvious problems, never peering deeper below the surface, because there's so many problems on the surface, so many things to look at, that very often we miss some of the biggest issues. And without that awareness, we reboot all of that underneath the surface with us. We take it with us because we're none the wiser. And this is why the Buddhists say that ignorance is one of those trappings of samsara, because ignorance is actually what prevents us from having the full understanding of how to correctly move forward in time without repeating the sins of our fathers, the mistakes of the past, or simply rebooting yesterday's problems in today, never being none the wiser, standing back, letting other people hand wave this goal that seems actually quite important. If we're shifting to a new timeline and a new society and a new earth, it seems like we would want to spend a lot of planning time mapping that out, talking about it, sharing videos about who should do what, versus hearkening back to being like Kitty Genovese in Queens, New York, who is sadly no longer with us, crying out for help, while her neighbors actually watched. Some of those neighbors actually watched. She was in a courtyard, screaming for her life. And instead of picking up a phone and doing something about it, they hand-waved. Somebody else is taking care of it. At least there was somebody that cried out, "Let that girl alone," so the perpetrator could leave for 10 minutes before returning to finish. So the bystander effect, spirituality and ascension, is critical to understand, because if we're really actually trying to get to the new earth, then who's driving that ship? And what does it look like?